Hello and welcome to the Blood Reds morning stream. I'm joined by my fellow Liverpool.com writer, Dave Comerford, and today we're going to talk a little bit about FSG and the Liverpool search for a sporting director. But first, I think the biggest news of last night anyway is that FSG are now more reportedly anyway leaning towards a partial sale rather than a full sale of Liverpool. What do you make of those reports, Dave? I think it's coming from the Boston Globe, so it's a fairly local, reliable source. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I think John Henry owns the Boston Globe, so any news that we kind of see emanating from there, we should probably take as that's what they're trying to filter out into the media, sort of the furthest they can go without kind of just releasing a statement saying it. In terms of the actual news, I think I'm kind of torn because on one level, maybe if it isn't a full sale, it's going to limit maybe the kind of change in terms of the investment and the transfer activity. But I think back to when they took on new investors in the form of Redbird, and we kind of thought maybe that was a moment that was going to make a big impact. And you'd probably say it hasn't really, unless the damage from the pandemic was a lot worse than we thought, and it's allowed Liverpool to at least make some top level signings. But it hasn't necessarily changed the way we're able to do business. It seems like in this case, it's going to be significant enough that it would change. That's good. And I think the other interesting element of it is they talk about finding someone who has the same sort of philosophies when it comes to team building as FSG, which I think is a good thing because to me it indicates that, keep everyone on the same page, obviously, which is important operationally, but more so than that, just about because we're probably concerned the way the direction the club was maybe heading in terms of recruitment. But if we kind of keep the emphasis we've got, I think, on players who have the potential to be world class and are kind of fairly young, kind of 24, 25, then that's probably the best way for us to recruit. I'd argue. So, yeah, if we can find people who are wealthy enough to allow us to compete more with our big six rivals in terms of the amount of money we're actually spending on our net spend, and also have sort of a sensible, you'd say, recruitment philosophy, then it's probably good news for Liverpool overall.
I wonder how much of this report is a sort of negotiation tactic as well, because in the actual report, it does state that while their preference might now be leaning towards a partial sale, they're still open to a full sale. So it's not like they're shutting the doors entirely. And I wonder if it's that their attempt was a sort of negotiation tactic to ramp up the price, saying, we're not that keen to sell. You need to make us an offer that we can't refuse, type of thing.
Yeah, it's possible because you have to think with this that a lot of it is about sort of the messages that you send. And one of the thing I'd say is that you wonder how much Man United going up for sale has impacted their plans, whether that's in terms of how it's affected the market, whether they had maybe a deal that was decently down the line, and then the people that they were negotiating with maybe got cold feet because they were like, hang on, should we go for Man United? You can speculate about the possibilities, but one thing you kind of can say with some certainty is that it's another kind of seismic announcement, really, that United are up for sale. And yeah, I mean, the way it's looking, it is going to be something that drags on for quite a long time. So I think maybe the possibility of a full sale might kind of stay there in the background, with the greater likelihood of the sale of a decent chunk of FSG share of the club, realistically. So yeah, we'll have to see how it develops, and like you say, we can't really rule anything out entirely just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have to agree with you. I think it is going to go on for quite a while. It seemed like in the early reports when the news was breaking, it seemed like it was going to be a quick thing, and they seemed like they might already have a suitor lined up. But now the longer it gets and the more reports we're hearing, it definitely is looking likely that it's going to drag on for some time. But hope from Liverpool's perspective anyway, another sort of grey area is the sporting director, and we're certainly hoping that's not going to drag on for a long time after Julian Ward's resignation. He's obviously still in charge until the end of the season, but it's another one that Liverpool will need to find someone suitable for the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that strikes me with this is, or maybe two things. Number one, Julian Ward's going to be making decisions this season that are going to have ramifications for his successor, which, when it could be an external hire, doesn't really sit right with me, to be honest. But it's just the way that it works, I suppose, with him resigning at the end of the season. And the second thing would be, how long is it going to take for a new sporting director, if it is going to be an outside hire, to implement their way of working, and how much does that affect what the club can do? I mean, hopefully not too much. I mean, there's probably examples of other clubs where they have been able to kind of get in there and make an impact quite quickly, but is it kind of the exact impact that they desire? So we'll have to say about that, because these kind of regime changes can take a while to kind of really take effect, and especially if they want to change things like, to do it the way the club scouts, for example. Like, if you were to plug an example out of thin air, Freund from Salzburg, if you wanted to do something closer to what Red Bull do, and we've written about this on the site, you'd probably be looking more at scouting, and because the kind of scouting markets that haven't really been explored that much, like say, for example, in Africa. So you'd then be looking to maybe expand the club scouting network, but how long is that going to take effect? So all things like that, really. And you've got to just be mindful, I think, of acting decisively to fill these vacancies off the pitch, because the more instability hangs over the club, not just with the owners, but also with kind of the makeup of the backroom team, then I think you can't really escape the effects of that on the pitch. These two things aren't happening independently. They are just inherently connected, and Liverpool have ended up in this position where everything's all kind of changing at once, and now they've got to try and limit the upheaval by acting decisively to sort out the future of the club, really.
I mean, one thing I'd like to point out with Freund as well, it's not just how long it would take for him to implement his ideas, but would his ideas or his method of doing things at Salzburg even work, when he has a huge network of clubs at Salzburg, and their policy is buying young players who need time to develop and hone their skills, whereas Liverpool need players now. They need players who are ready and who can step up and play in the Premier League. And I think on that note, another name that has been linked is Sven Mislintat. According to Sky Germany, he's open to the possibility of linking up with Jurgen Klopp again. Of course, they worked together at Borussia Dortmund together and were fairly successful. But again, since his Dortmund days where he had a falling out with Thomas Tuchel over a transfer, his track record is kind of not great. He went to Arsenal after Dortmund. Not a lot of his signings worked out there. He left very quickly. And then he joined Stuttgart, which he's leaving after 2 years or 3 years, I think, again. And there he had a few successful signings in his early days, the likes of Silas and Wimper and Sasha Kalajdzic and a few others. I think Gregor Kobel as well, who moved on to Borussia Dortmund. But on the whole, Stuttgart again are in the relegation zone in the Bundesliga, and things haven't worked out entirely for him there either.
Yeah, I think it's one of them where his stock has kind of fallen from its height at Dortmund, when he was a lot of the time, finding these players quite cheap, and then they did end up largely moving on to Bayern Munich for a big profit. And yeah, I think a lot of Liverpool fans, if it was to progress, and I don't think it will, would be looking at his record at Arsenal and thinking that's a major kind of warning sign for Liverpool. The positive is that he obviously has the existing relationship with Klopp, and we can't underestimate how important kind of the interpersonal dynamics are. We've heard a lot about how it used to be kind of Klopp, Gordon and Edwards kind of as the triumvirate leading the club, really. And they all seem to have a good relationship, and that is important. But obviously, you need someone as well who has the kind of the skills and the credentials. And if you look at maybe his career as a whole and not just that spell at Dortmund, then maybe it doesn't look like the best appointments. And I always wonder as well whether when you're a sporting director, it's a kind of fundamental skill set or whether it's attuned to a certain club. So you look at Michael Edwards, say he goes to another club now where he's got a lot more money to spend. Is he going to look as good as he did at Liverpool? Probably not, because at Liverpool, his negotiating ability and also, the scouting department that he had, their ability to find kind of their ability to spot talent in the first place, those two things worked really well within the FSG model. There obviously isn't too much money to spend. If he went to, say, Manchester United, just to pluck an example again out of thin air, then he's probably going to have, especially under new owners, he could have loads more money to spend, and he could just look like, he could still look like a good sporting director, but maybe not kind of the specialist that he did. And equally with Mislintat, he's in that Dortmund model, which has basically become buy a player for a relatively low price. They develop there, and then they move on to a club kind of above you in the ladder for a lot more money. At Liverpool, it's not really about that as much. He's going to find players who can establish themselves as world class at Liverpool and stay there. So again, the challenge is quite different. So I always wonder, how much is it transferable? And you'd argue the same, like you said there with Freund. So are Liverpool better finding someone who's used to working at maybe the kind of very highest level and operates within kind of similar parameters. So I think these are all kind of considerations for Liverpool. And I don't think Mislintat would be the one really. He's sort of one of the early names to be linked, but not for me.
I think I have to agree. And I think on the whole, that's probably why Liverpool have kept Julian Ward on until the end of the season and haven't just, with mutual agreement, let him go and decided to go for someone else, because finding the right, I think it's really crucial to find the right replacement for him and the right candidate, and that takes time. But I think that about wraps it up for today. Thanks, Dave, for joining me. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. As always, do check out the rest of the Blood Red content going out today and all the written content on Liverpool.com as well.